Thank you for tuning into episode 4 of Culture, Power, and the Pen, a podcast where we explore the voices and stories of Asian minority communities. I'm your host, Andy, and I'm honored to be speaking with Katie Ka Vang, a Hmong American playwright and performer whose work blends personal history, cultural identity, and resilience. From growing up in California and Colorado to making her home in Minnesota, Katie's journey has shaped the themes she brings to the stage, whether through her solo show Final Round, written during her recovery from cancer, or her new play Six Pack, centering a Hmong American volleyball team. Her writing draws from Hmong oral traditions and lived experience, creating stories that are at once intimate and universal. Today, we'll talk about how storytelling becomes a form of empowerment, how theater can sustain cultural traditions in contemporary life, and what it means to claim space as a Hmong playwright. Let's begin. So, what first sparked your interest in storytelling as a child? Was there like a specific moment or experience that made you love it?
Yeah, as a kid, I was always sort of deeply moved by like stories, whether it was a story being told by my mom or my dad or my siblings. I was always just moved by them either telling a story or recalling, like just even recalling their day, you know. And so I remember even when I was watching movies, I just felt myself going through an experience that felt so embodied. Um, and so that was sort of really like what sparked my interest. And I think as a child, we're always listening, right? And so I think that's something that I picked up and continue to hold on to, sort of as I continue moving on throughout my life. And, being an avid listener, I realized how much I love stories. And then I realized that I realized how much I actually love stories even more when I started to write them myself. And I think like the stories that I write sort of help shape me and my beliefs and even my worldviews that I've sort of inherited from my parents.
So, growing up in Santa Ana, that's like West Coast, and then moving on later in Colorado and then in Minnesota, moving more towards like the East. How did these environments shape your storytelling style and, the sort of the themes you often return to in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly write from a very like specific identity, so being born in Santa Ana, I was born in Santa Ana, but my family moved to Merced, California. And even there, I had a sense of belonging because even in my elementary school, like the classroom was filled with half Hmong kids, so there wasn't a lot of like questions or I think I just felt like I belonged. And then in the 4th grade, my family moved to Colorado. We moved to a suburb in Colorado and we lived with my aunt for a little bit, which is where, we lived with my aunt for a little bit until my parents found jobs. And in the 4th grade at that specific elementary school, my brother and I became 2 of, I think, 8 students of color in the whole entire school. And later I found a community in Colorado. There was a Hmong church, so we went to church. And then later within like a specific volleyball circuit. And so I think, I think these experiences of moving around definitely shaped, my stories, like who I want to center, the specific place or area that I want to like write about or that my characters are like based in. So yeah.
So, when you were young, like as a child, did you view storytelling and kind of playwriting as already like a form of resistance or cultural preservation, or was it something perhaps that kind of started later and it wasn't something that was, a form of resistance when it started?
Oh yeah, I mean, as a child, definitely not. Like I think
Yeah.
I didn't even have any understanding of resistance or cultural preservation. I think at that time, my family was just trying to survive, right? My parents were both refugee immigrants. So yeah, not at all. But the idea of resistance and preservation is a part of my politicized identity that, I came into when I actually pursued the arts and theater. What I did know as a child was that when I experienced storytelling, like I often felt an openness that felt sort of uh like something I couldn't didn't have words for, like something that sort of transcended even language, And so I knew that every time I experienced art, it made me feel a little lighter, even though I didn't quite understand or have the words to like describe it. And then I also knew that like whoever I was experiencing it with, like most likely we were also having a similar experience, even though we had different backgrounds. So,
Mm.
I mean, I think, yeah. So no, I didn't know as a child, but I think the activism part of it came later on in life for sure. Yeah.
Mm. So obviously, in Hmong culture, like oral traditions is like an important part and is also kind of like a part of your storytelling. So how do these kind of oral traditions really influence the way you write and perform your work?
Yeah, I think that I think because theater is such an embodied art form, and I work also in performance too, right? So theater, I write it and then I perform it. Sometimes I perform. Most recently, I write for other people to perform, and so I think oftentimes my the the tradition, the cultural influence comes in, I think, inflection. And I think because I think similar to Chinese, Hmong is a tonal language, but there's a very distinctive like inflection that will happen when an elder is telling a story, And so I think that I always try to like include those inflections into my characters, and the inflection also then informs who the characters are, right? And the beautiful thing also about inflections is that oftentimes it elevates the story, and it oftentimes enhances an emotional moment. Like I even think about um, even my friends who are not Hmong, my Filipino friends, my Mexican friends, like when they hear my mom talking, and she speaks and they're like, "Oh, I don't know what she's saying, but I know it's not good." So I think the beautiful things about like paying attention to the inflections and how they can sort of be incorporated into my stories is like a really huge element for me, and it's sort of the ways that that the Hmong culture has influenced my work.
Definitely. I definitely felt that like when I did my podcast with Kao Yang, the way that she kind of talks is just in a way very soothing and has like a lot of tonal kind of feeling to it. And yeah, definitely like I see that kind of reflection coming in. And just reflecting on your kind of childhood experience, was there like a moment or story from your childhood that really stuck with you and continues to resonate in your work?
Hmm. A moment as childhood. I think so many. I just feel like as a child, I absorbed so many stories. Um, but I think it's who told me the stories, right? So I think the importance of nuance, and within this, like the complexity of like a family and a family unit, whether it be immediate family, extended, or found family, and then the dynamics of just like all the different beliefs within a family. I think that's something that's stuck with me and continues to, I think, like be visible in my work.
Mm. So, growing up like in the United States where there's like a lot of multicultural like an environment, how did you come to understand or navigate your Hmong identity? So like, you mentioned in Colorado there was like only 8 students of color and you were just one of them. And how's that sort of experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically during that time, which was in elementary school, and we lived with my aunt who lived in a specific part of a suburb in Colorado. And so I was, at the time I could forget that I was like, I was different. I was like, how do I fit in? What am I? So I just found myself in those years at that first couple years in Colorado at that specific suburban elementary school, just trying to figure out like, who do I play with? Where do I go? But I think that because I had such a wide imagination, in retrospect now, I kind of just played with everybody and anyone. and which might also be my way of like coping, right? Like, how adaptable can you be? You know, it's like you are by yourself, so you play with whoever's available and who wants to play with you, you know. But you know, much later on, we moved into more like the inner city. So I lived in Denver, which had a lot more uh, communities of color, you know. And so then I found Hmong friends, I had Mexican friends, I had Indian friends, you know. And so I think my network at that time became a lot more vibrant. And but still at that time, I felt like I had no, I think, framework or language to even tell the difference of, to tell folks the nuances of who I was as a Hmong person, because I barely understood who I was too at that time, you know. And growing up in the 90s, everything was very much like black and white, at least where I was in my understanding of the world at that time. And I knew that I didn't have any proximity to whiteness. So if I wasn't white, then I was black, you know. And so I definitely gravitated more towards black culture, hip hop culture, and through music is really where I started to find like voices that I felt resonated with me, voices that were aspirational to me, like, you know, Salt and Peppa, the rappers, and like Lauryn Hill, you know. But at the same time, I do feel like music plays such a huge part because my family were Christians. And so we went to a Hmong church, which, you know, I had a lot of influences in like praise and worship and singing. And so I also was like really into, I just had a really wide swath of like tastes, you know. Um, and I think what I realized is that I was connected, and I liked things that was able to make me feel deeply and make me feel whole, you know? So, yeah.
You know, you could sort of mention, you know, how in the 90s, you know, people were really separated, like white, black, kind of these identities, right? And were, you know, you mentioned you gravitated more towards, you know, black and identity. Was that something like you felt pressured into sort of aligning, or was it something that came more naturally?
As far as like finding black culture or trying to find an identity, or both, maybe.
Yeah, maybe like a mix of both.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, at that age when you're so like impressionable, like, and you want to belong. And so you had to become a part of something. And so I knew that even though the black culture didn't encompass all of my lived experiences, it was the most easily understood at that time, understood enough, you know, for me to sort of like lean towards. And then I also knew that like, um, you know, there were nuances to those experiences that I knew that were not mine, but I understood that that specific art form allowed them to talk about their nuances, you know. And so I became really enamored in sort of like the intersectionalities of like different cultures, you know. So, you know, in the 90s, which is when I felt like a lot of good music was coming out, you know, like for example, like Gwen Stefani, you know, this lead singer of No Doubt came out. She was like, you know, a blonde hair white girl, but she always wore like this bindi on in the middle of her forehead. And I was like, well, she's cool and she's rocking that bindi, but it's actually not American. It's actually, it comes from like the Hindu faith, you know? And so what I would do then is like I would start to research, when this was like when internet was very new, you know, it barely
Yeah.
existed. And so I'd start to like, I'd lock something in my memory, like this is interesting, and then I would like sort of move along through the years, and then a piece of information or history would come up, and I was like, oh, this is the connection to that group of people that Gwen Stefani is trying to be like, and their history is like, you know, I started thinking about like the Hindu Muslim rights, and so then I started to like piece together and learn about different cultures for myself, and by
Totally.
doing that, collecting all these little morsels of like historical knowledge that was not from a white centric like lens, I was able to start to understand my own history and piece together my own people's history through my family's experience.
Mm. So, as you started growing up and, activism kind of became like more of like a part of your identity, how has, playwriting and, poetry been a source of strength for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think it gave me my voice. You know, I think first you're always just like, what it helped me make sense of the world. It helped me navigate the world, and it gave me space to figure out like my beliefs and who I side with and when is it necessary. So I think in that way, I feel like playwriting and poetry and art in general really gave me a sense of self, and it politicized me, you know?
Mm. So can you maybe like recall like a specific moment when really putting your story into performance help you process like a difficult moment or time in your life?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think generally all of my projects are really about me processing a thing. But I think um, I had a solo show that I wrote called Final Round. And back then I was a solo performer, so I was an actor, and I wrote scripts for myself to perform in. And it was called Final Round, and I wrote it when I was in 100 days in quarantine from my second bone marrow transplant, because I was a cancer survivor. I am a cancer survivor,
Mm.
but before becoming that, I had to go through two different bone marrow transplants. And this is also before COVID, so being in quarantine was not a thing, right? And one of the procedures for the second bone marrow that I got was that I had to be away from people for 100 days. And so, since I was a theater maker and a writer, I decided that to make use of my time and to, keep myself in good spirits, that I would start to write this show. And so I wrote a show called Final Round. It was about me dealing with cancer and sort of um, the ways that my community chooses to or chooses not to talk about serious illnesses in our community. And then also, there were non-Hmong people who came to see it, and white folks came to see it. And they were like, it resonates a lot because oftentimes having a serious illness, you know, is kind of like shied away from. I think, and this is like in 2016, I think. And, it's a lot different now. I think everyone is a lot more willing to talk about mental health and, mental health and therapy and all that. But, I think in 2016, we're sort of like at the cusp of like coming into accepting that mental health and serious illness is a thing that none of us really want to talk about, you know.
Mm. Definitely. So, you mentioned, there are like other, folks from different cultures that came to see your shows. So, how do you really balance, sharing authentic Hmong stories with like making them accessible to readers outside of the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I try to do is I feel like they're kind of like tiers, right? And so I feel like I always have to like be interested in it for myself first. And then my first tier is always like my Hmong audience. I think I first write for myself and the Hmong audiences, and then hopefully the Asian American audience, and then like a BIPOC audience, and then like Hmong Asian BIPOC allies.
Mm.
I never set out to write for somebody else. Like I always have to write for myself.
Mm.
Otherwise, then I feel like I can't get to the other side, or like finish a project if I'm centering somebody else's like interest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I find that connection like when I'm writing my own sort of poetry and writing, I feel like I really have to start with myself and because the most interesting stories are the ones that are funky, they're weird, they're like uniquely you, and that's makes them really authentic and what
Yes.
connects other people, right? And
Yeah.
just moving on, what sort of gaps do you really see in the Hmong theater and performance, and what narratives do you think still need to be explored on stage?
Oh man, I mean, so many gaps. I mean, I think I'm like one of like 3 Hmong playwrights, you know,
Yeah.
who has new, and I can say that I'm lucky because I can say that right now, my bread and butter comes from writing and making theater, and not a lot of people can say that. I think there are other writers who also, you know, write books and they write plays and they write films and do all these things, but I feel like right now so the gap is huge. Like there needs to be, more writers, more playwrights, more theater makers. And I think it's changing more and more now, but it's still so big because I can only write from my perspective, and we need multiple perspectives out there. So
And moving on to, like a topic that's lighter and talking about more about culture, community, and your like identity. How does, your family celebrate traditional Hmong holidays like the Hmong New Year? Are there any memories tied to these celebrations that really stand out to you?
yeah, I mean, I think celebrations for me have sort of been about like being together with my family. Um, so like, for the Hmong New Year, we'll all get dressed up, and then we'll go to the local Hmong celebration. Um, I think one thing that sticks out the most to me is sort of like this tradition of spending extended amounts of time with my mom as she's dressing me for the Hmong New Year, because the outfits are really like elaborate, and it's like they're just piling it on in layers and layers, and so I think it's something that my mom always took pride in the way that she got to dress me and my sister, specifically because we became like hyphenated Americans, right? Like Hmong American. And so as teenage girls, she was all she had very little saying what we could wear, even though she tried. So I think this was the one time once a year where my mom could actually dress us, and we just had, as she was dressing us, she would tell us stories, about her life and the significance of certain things. And so I think that became sort of like a tradition that I like kind of miss now that I'm married. Yeah.
Definitely. Is there any sort of comfort food that like comes to mind whenever you think of, these traditional Hmong holidays?
Yeah.
Any food?
Yeah, definitely. There's actually this dish we call jakao, and it's like a pickled green vegetable that I remember growing up. I used to hate making it, but my mom used to make me do it all the time, and it would happen like in the middle of summer because the specific vegetable would grow so abundantly, and so after she would harvest some, it would another batch would grow in like 2 weeks, and so I found myself most of my summer just like learning how to make this specific pickled vegetable. And it's one of my favorite things to eat ever. And I'm so glad that my mom forced me to make it. And now we do it together every year. So yeah.
Like a lot of times, yeah, childhood, food, like I just hated it, but when you grow up, there's sort of like that kind of memory that comes that gets carried over, and then you start
Yeah.
liking it more and more, right? Definitely.
Yes. Yes.
So how do you really see, the younger generations of Hmong people engaging with their culture and identity today?
I see, because I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's, sort of like a huge Hmong hub, and so I feel like a lot of the younger generation now, they're using art as a way to document and understand and engage with the Hmong culture and identity. And I think it's a beautiful thing because um, I feel like if it's embedded into the art and if you're using art, then in some ways it won't ever die, you know?
And moving on to sort of legacy and reflections, do you have like a person who really has an impact on your playwriting and activism?
Oh, wow. I always think about my very first, like, I guess, official mentor, because I didn't get training through any, like, I didn't go to undergrad for playwriting or anything. I did go to an MFA, but when I became a theater maker, I was introduced to Lori Carlos, and she is a writer, director, performance artist. She was actually one of the original For Color Girls on Broadway. I don't know if you're familiar with that play, but She originated the role of the lady in blue, and she happened to move into the Twin Cities, and she really held my hand and like made me believe. One thing that she said to me is that nothing is arbitrary. So if you wrote it, um, it will always connect with something else that you're writing. And so I think that's always like stuck with me, and I still till today like still live by that and believe that nothing is arbitrary. Whatever you write, even though it seems like it doesn't relate to something, it really does.
Mm. Now you obviously, when you started, you didn't have a lot of plays, but now like you have, like, after the journey, through the journey, you've made a lot of plays and a lot of writing. So how do you define really success as like a playwright and poet, and how has that definition kind of shifted over the course of your career?
Yeah, it's definitely shifted. I think when I first got into it, it's really just about like being seen and being heard, right? And then it was like finding your voice, right? Like, so you're seen, you're heard, but what are you trying to say within that? What is your voice? Right? And then after that, it's like, oh, I can actually make some money doing this and get paid for doing it, right? And then it's like, okay, and then it's finding the right collaborators, right? Like, are there enough people out there who understand your worldview, who won't water it down or who won't try to make it something else? And are they able to like actually help you get your projects into a different phase or help it have another life somewhere else, outside of like your immediate circles? And so I think one way that I define success um, is am I constantly evolving either in my work or in the connections that I'm making?
As playwright and also like a writer, what do you hope the audience take away from your work, both in terms of you like on a personal level or like the broader Hmong community?
Yeah, I always hope that my audience like finds some kind of resonance to it. Hopefully they find something that relates to them. And then I hope that it like sparks some kind of like action afterwards, whether if it's actually picking up the phone and calling someone they love, or whether if it's like shifting the way they treat somebody, you know. And then I also really hope that my writing inspires them to also tell their own stories. So
That's great. So what advice would you give someone, like any aspiring poets and playwrights, especially those from like underrepresented backgrounds, like in marginalized communities like Hmong, who are still trying to find their voice through their work?
yeah, I would say if you're able to be your best champion, be your best champion. Claim that you are what you are. If you've written a poem or two and you're like, I don't know, I've only written one poem. If you say you are a poet, then you are a poet and you claim it, because no one else is going to tell you you're a poet. You have to claim that. So first claim that, champion your own work and yourself. And if you aren't able to, because I know these things take time, to like build into it. If you aren't able to champion your own work, you have to keep making your work. So even if you say I've only written two poems, I don't know if I can call myself a poet. Okay, so you might not want to call yourself a poet yet, but just keep writing your poems then. Keep writing. And I bet you will find the right people who will champion your work and who you will champion their work.
I really resonated with that because, as someone who has also written like a lot of poetry on my own, I feel like, the volume really matters, because sometimes your poems can be really just tied with yourself, and then you submit it to like a publication or a magazine and they may not like it. And, these magazines are really competitive, and it's really about, writing more and more and more. And then in the end, there's definitely going to be a piece that really resonates with, whoever is reading, right? So closing with just the last few questions, if you could recommend one book, film, or play that truly captures the essence of Hmong storytelling, what would it be?
Ooh, I don't know if there's actually like one. or even, I mean, you mentioned Kaukalia. I think her books capture one aspect of Hmong people. Um, but I'm really thinking about things that are, I think, so there, I listen to a lot of like speakers, a lot of Hmong speakers, and I think leaders. And I think that inspires me a lot. There is a woman, her name is Bo Tao Urabi, and she is a local, well, she works locally. Well, she works nationally, but she lives here locally. And she's sort of like a nonprofit worker who is now sort of like a community organizer, and I think sort of works in philanthropy now. But I'm really inspired by, I think, the talks that I've watched and sort of like my interactions with her. Um, I think as far as like shows and films, they're not Hmong, but I feel like there are essences and resonance that remind me of my own culture. And the first show is actually Reservation Dogs. It's a show on FX. And then there's another show called I think it's season 2 of the show called True Detective, that really resonates with me in a way that I feel like I want to see Hmong people sort of centered in the same way. So,
and just wrapping this up, what's next for you in the store? Any upcoming projects or ideas you're particularly excited about?
yeah, actually, I'm right now in the throes of getting a final script. Well, we are in rehearsals right now for the world premiere of one of my next plays called Six Pack, and yeah, so that opens at the Jungle Theater in Minneapolis at the end of May, and it runs for a month. And so I'm sort of like, in the throes of doing rewrites and like fixing lines and moving scenes to different areas. And I'm working with an all Asian American Hmong cast. Yeah, and this is a story about a Hmong American female volleyball team.
Well, thank you. We'll definitely be on the lookout for that. And just, thank you so much for being part of the podcast and just taking the time to do this. It's really meaningful.
Oh, thank you, Andy. And, thanks for these questions too. Very thoughtful.